Hi everyone, my name is Jenn Dale. I'm a consultant. I work in Washington, D.C., but I work with the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation on their federal policy. And I'm going to be leading this webinar today called Advocacy 101, What's Going On in Washington and How You Can Be an Effective Advocate for Myotonic Dystrophy. So just a quick session overview. First, we'll be talking about federal policy making overview. Then we'll talk about the current climate in Washington, D.C., and then we'll move on to the power of constituent advocacy and why we sort of have called you all here and are asking for your help. So just a quick reminder, as I'm sure you all know, the Constitution created 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, and we are focusing on the Congress mostly. That includes the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. While each branch is obviously important, the Congress makes the laws and it determines how much money is spent on certain activities, including myotonic dystrophy research. Congress is also the closest branch to the people via your senators, or even closer to home for some of you via your representatives. So what I mean by that is they're people that you may see out and about, and they're much more easily accessible than certain other people in the government. And then the administration does play an important role. It implements laws and it runs the government on a day-to-day basis. But these actions are guided and shaped by the parameters that are put forward by Congress via law. And just a little sort of background information on how Congress works. Most representatives, or almost all representatives, sit on 1 to 3 committees. So in the Senate, they often sit on up to 3 committees because the Senate body is a bit smaller than the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, they can sit on between 1 and 3 committees. If they sit on one, it's often a much larger committee like Energy and Commerce or Ways and Means, and they're exclusive, meaning that they can only sit on that committee. So these committees have assigned roles and responsibilities, including jurisdiction over issues, sectors of the economy, and government departments and agencies. They hold hearings, they debate policy, and they develop and amend, or you'll often hear the term markup, legislation. And just a quick note that any member of Congress can actually introduce legislation on any issue, but it just frequently makes more sense for a member on a committee to do this because they enjoy a greater ability to influence policy and legislation within the panel's purview. And so this is why MDF prioritizes visits involving members of key committees. Now, we'll move on to the current climate in Washington. As I'm sure you've all seen in the news, partisanship and the divide between Republicans and Democrats is very high and frequently impacts the ability to legislate and govern. Something that's unique to this year versus last year is that the midterm elections are taking place this year in November. And so they've quickly become a high priority for members, and a lot of them are focused on preserving their seats and appealing to their base voters, meaning that they're less willing to work across the aisle and compromise to get legislation passed. And then lastly, as you've seen in the news, President Trump's administration has endured many scandals lately and frequent staff changes. So there's a lot of unknown with the administration right now. And so what's on Congress's plate today? In short, a lot. But first and foremost, developing a budget plan for fiscal year 2019, which starts in October. So October 1st begins the new fiscal year. And so we'll actually touch on this later because MDF's legislative priority for this year is getting a provision included in the budget for fiscal year 2019. But they're also focused on rebuilding the nation's infrastructure. That's something that's a priority for the president and for many members of Congress as well. And gun violence prevention reform has moved to the forefront because of recent shootings, and we're seeing more of a willingness to work across the aisle for a compromise. That being said, things change every week here in Washington, so it's not a certainty or a guarantee that they'll get something through. And then lastly, the opioid crisis is also a huge priority for both the administration and Congress. So although things seem very turbulent here in Washington, MDF actually had a major legislative win this last year. We were thrilled because myotonic dystrophy was added as an eligible research area in the peer-reviewed medical research program, which is a program that's part of the Defense Health Program. It's called their Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, also known as CDMRP, for fiscal year 2018. So what this does is it opens myotonic dystrophy up to be eligible for certain grants for research. There's a large pot of money under this program, this PRMRP program, and only certain diseases are eligible to apply for grants in this program. And MDF has actually been advocating for PRMRP inclusion for many years now, but this past year, in large part thanks to the help of a network of advocates like yourselves, we were successful. So just a background information on CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. It was established by Congress in 1992, actually by breast cancer advocates. It is designed as sort of a pool of money in the Defense Health Program that is either attributed to specific diseases, or there's a large pot, which I mentioned, the peer-reviewed medical research program, that then can be used for a specific list of diseases. So it invests in high-impact, high-risk, and high-gain research. It's grown from $25 million from its inception to over $1 billion annually. And it's funded at least 43 diseases, conditions, and areas of research, including Duchenne muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, ALS, and autism. Now, the House program is a bit different than the Senate program in that the House program generally just includes disease-specific line item funding, as I mentioned earlier. But the Senate program includes a pool of funding, which is the peer-reviewed medical research program, and disease line item funding. So our target is to get myotonic dystrophy included in that pool of funding like it was this past year, but for the next year. So our goal is to continue the inclusion of myotonic dystrophy in the peer-reviewed medical research program that's part of CDMRP. So why do we need advocates if we were already successful? So again, we were thrilled to gain this PRMRP inclusion for FY18, but our work still continues. We need to ensure that it will be included in future budgets. And I want to point out that, as I mentioned earlier, we've been advocating for this inclusion for many years now, but we were successful in 2017 because we had multiple advocates across the country contacting their senators about PRMRP. Just a little backstory, we had advocates in California working closely with Senator Dianne Feinstein's office. We had someone in Hawaii working with Senator Schatz's office. We had advocates talking to Senator Kane's office and Senator Rubio's offices. And we had a group of advocates in Illinois that were working with Senator Durbin's office. So that's 5 senators that we touched. And again, we worked very closely with Senator Feinstein's office. And in the case of Senator Durbin's office, the group of advocates were able to pass along the information to the DC team here and let them know that they were planning to meet with Senator Durbin's district staff. So we then flagged it for his DC staff, who communicated with the district staff and briefed the staffer on the issue. So it was just a really great example of grassroots sort of activation and communication that led to us approaching this from multiple angles and really being able to get multiple senators involved. And really, as I said many times now, we've tried for this for many years, but it was getting that constituent connection that really pushed this over the edge. And so we've got to keep this momentum going as we advocate for DM for PRMRP for FY19. And so that's why we're having this webinar, is that we're hoping that we can grow our network of advocates and get more of you to write in or call your senators. So just a point about the power of constituent advocates. You guys are really the most important advocate in Washington, D.C. Even from your home districts, even if you're just calling in, your advocacy is more important than anyone else hears. You vote for or against your members of Congress. You live nearest to your members of Congress. You see them at the July 4th parade, at town hall meetings, in the grocery store, at their kids' schools, at houses of worship, etc. You also have a really personal and authentic message that has come out of your own life experience and needs, and so you're the expert on this issue, and they rely on you to really communicate what your needs are to them so that they can be your members and help you and serve you in the way that is needed. And then you've taken time out of your lives to make your voices heard on these issues, and their staff and the representatives themselves really appreciate that. It does not go unnoticed. So like I said, you don't have to be in Washington, D.C. to be an advocate. Your representatives have offices in your home state. They often have, the Senate offices are generally scattered throughout the state, and then House members also frequently have multiple district offices. So you could meet with the staff in those offices, or you could also correspond via email or phone call with the Washington staff. You could also do both. You could meet with the district staff and then correspond with the DC staff. I know in the case of some of our advocates that I mentioned were part of that network for PRMRP for 2018, they were frequently working with district staff and DC staff. Also, just remember, you don't have to be a policy expert, so there should be no pressure. You shouldn't feel intimidated to be working with them or to reach out to them. The staff really just want you to help them better understand myotonic dystrophy and to hear about your personal experiences with myotonic dystrophy. Being a successful advocate really takes a lot of work, just like any relationship. So it just requires you building relationships with this staff and following up with them and making it known that you're watching and that you're paying attention to these issues and that they're really important to you. And also just having a solid foundation, building a relationship with staff, even if it's not always about a specific legislative ask, is always helpful so that they can understand you and myotonic dystrophy before you come in with the request. So you can even just set up an introductory meeting with the staff or a phone call to sort of explain your positions and let them know your experiences with myotonic dystrophy and what policies could be helpful for you going forward. So what should you say? We kind of just touched on this, but here's a sample email or call talking point. So you just call, we'll say this is for a call. You'd call, you'd introduce yourself, and you'd say where you're from. You'd explain that either you have myotonic dystrophy, you have a friend or a loved one living with myotonic dystrophy. And then you'd give a little background on what the disease is, and then explain that federal funding for myotonic dystrophy research has actually been pretty minimal and there are no approved treatments for the condition. So we need the help of Congress. And then you could say, I'm contacting you to ask for your support for efforts to include myotonic dystrophy as part of the congressionally directed medical research program. Or you could say you're contacting this person to reach out for an introductory meeting or to ask for a meeting with or a call with the Washington staff as well. And then lastly, you could just share your mailing address or your email address so that they can get back to you. And you'll frequently do that even if you call, because you'll not necessarily get through to the staff that you want to speak to right away. You generally will speak to whoever answers the phones and they'll pass your message along. So who should you contact? So again, you'll email, call, or visit the district or the DC offices. And then if you have any questions about your senators or your representatives, you can find them at this link that's on the PowerPoint. You can also go to house.gov, I believe, and they'll give you at least your House member's name. And then if you know who your senators and your representatives are and you just want to call them, you can always dial the U.S. Capitol switchboard, and an operator will just connect you directly to those offices. And as I touched on, this is mostly about relationship building. So we obviously want to be presenting legislative asks to the staffers, but we also want to be creating relationships with these staff so that when we do have legislative asks or as things that come up, healthcare is frequently at the sort of on the minds of a lot of members of Congress lately, and they've tried to reform the ACA in many ways. And so when you see something come up that you might be worried about, if you've developed a relationship with staff, you can always contact them or let them know how it would affect you. Or over time, as you develop that relationship, they may reach out to you and say, how would this affect a patient like yourself? What do you think about this legislative change or provision? So once you have your introductory meeting or phone call, we recommend that you follow up by writing the staffer a thank you email 1 to 2 days after, and then remind him or her of your legislative asks, or just send them some background information on myotonic dystrophy. Then if you did have an ask, in 2 weeks, you could follow up with that staffer and politely ask them if there's any update on your ask. You can also communicate these communications to myself or anyone on our DC team or anyone at MDF, just so that we're aware that you're working with those offices. And then also it's great to try and find opportunities like town hall meetings or Congress on Your Corner events to meet or deepen your member relationships. As I mentioned earlier, they're frequently out and about in the neighborhoods, and the purpose of that is so that they can get to know people like yourself. So take advantage of those things. You can look at your member or senators' Facebooks or Twitters. They'll often post about events that they're doing in the community. And then if you're waiting months or longer to connect or to follow up after a meeting with the office, then that's just far too long. You want to stay fresh on their mind, and you want to let them know that you're really actively engaged in these issues. So what else can you do? The first one we already touched on, seek opportunities to develop a relationship with a member and their staff. You could draft a letter to the editor about our DM congressional priorities. If you need any help with that, you can also talk to us or MDF. You can invite family and friends to become DM advocates, so they could also call their representatives about these issues. And then you can stay connected with MDF for action alerts all year. So by doing that, then you'll be aware of any sort of arising issues that come up that are related to DM, and again, then use that as a reason to contact your senators or representatives. And lastly, if you have any questions, or like I said, if you'd like to share with me any communication you've had with congressional offices, that would be great. You can reach me at jen.dale@faegrebd.com.